is by definition temporary. It sounds super morbid, but acknowledging the impermanence is very liberating because it reminds us that we have to weave that wider net of people, so it's more than just those two people.
Welcome back to Lovelink. I'm your guest host and therapist at Modern Mind, Lydia Duquette. Today's episode is called Let the Village Play Rhythm. And here's the big idea. When we expect one relationship, specifically our romantic partner, to meet every need, the pressure can smother both connection and desire. My colleague at Modern Mind, therapist Chloé Bringmann, is here to show us why widening our relationship ecosystem doesn't dilute romance, it revives it. So let's dive in. Hi, Chloé. Thank you for being here.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here with you, Lydia.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation today. And I thought maybe just to start us off, because I had this question for you when we first started brainstorming ideas, if you could just break down the title a little bit, tell me more.
Yeah.
I think it's so fun and interesting and a good enough, entry point for the conversation.
Well, I like to think about life as music. I am a big fan of all types of music and composition. And so when I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about our relationships as music and a composition. And so the idea is that we can let the village or our larger relational ecosystem play rhythm so that our more romantic relationship can riff and have more of a playful dialogue in terms of whether it's desire or some musical scales.
Yeah, I love that. So kind of having, the ecosystem, as you said, be the baseline, and then these other relationships come in and embellish, add things that are fun and playful, but we sort of tend to think about romantic partnerships as needing to be everything: the foundation, the fun, the play,
yes,
the structure, the support. So yeah, I love that reframing. And, I'm curious about this shift from community-centric to partner-centric dynamics. Can you tell me a little bit about what that shift looks like in day-to-day life? And why does this topic feel particularly relevant for you as a therapist?
Yeah. So I like to imagine two people trying to cram an entire village worth of needs, whether it be childcare, emotional safety, passion, intellectual stimulation, financial partnership, into what is basically a camping tent. It doesn't work. Essentially, the pole is going to start to bend. I'm not a camper, but I like that analogy because those poles would seem kind of flimsy to me anyway. But regardless, it doesn't support, it's not going to be able to support all of that within the confines of the camping tent. Historically, we spread those needs around, right? It's aunties helping raising babies, it's neighbors swapping whatever tools or things like that cup of sugar that someone needs for baking, faith communities offering counsel, or friends providing the pep talks that, are so essential to our relationships. And that has kept desire alive in the romantic realm. Today, half of US adults aged between 25 and 54 are unmarried. And yet the cultural script is still whispering to us, your one true love will meet every need. And I see the fallout in therapy every week. Couples are feeling guilty for being tired. They're ashamed for being bored and confused that something as simple as love feels really heavy. And we shrink the village. We don't just make romance harder, we make it carry a load it was really never designed to bear.
Yeah, and you're making me think about, of course, we're talking about clients and friends, family members that are in potentially romantic relationships, but I'm also thinking about clients, friends, family members who aren't, who are actually still putting the emphasis on that, future, hopeful, romantic partner being all of these things, right? There's this craving or longing for one or multiple people to come in and sort of fill what maybe is perceived to be a void of some kind.
Yes.
So I guess my point is we emphasize it when we are in relationship, but we also emphasize it when we're not. And I
Exactly.
think, it's so interesting. And there are all kinds of ways that that's culturally informed, right? The things that we absorb growing up, the conversations that we hold, the sort of cultural norms that we're surrounded by. But I guess, I'm going off a little bit, but how do you feel like this shows up in terms of therapeutic training? Because, this is a thing that, is coming into my awareness more and more as I work with couples, but it's not necessarily something that's emphasized in coursework or when we're trained in particular models. So do you see this sort of phenomenon show up in the way actually that therapists are trained to be therapists? Does that make sense?
As in, how do therapists understand this paradigm of loneliness and or connection?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's something around, even within the therapeutic realm, there tends to be an emphasis on partnership and, romantic
Yeah.
connection. And it's not that we're trying to eliminate that or de-emphasize it, but it's sort of a different emphasis.
I think it depends on the training that you get, right? So
Yeah.
my training, I was really lucky to go to a really excellent school in California called the California Institute of Integral Studies. And it's very much an east-west approach. And so it is blending a lot of cultural paradigms and understandings where it's not just this one kind of Western cultural idea of what it is to be in a relationship, but rather understanding what it might look like in Asia and Africa, in Europe, and really trying to hold all of that together when we're not only speaking to someone from maybe my own culture, but also trying to broaden the horizon of what it could look like.
Yeah.
And so it's really, I feel very lucky that I had that training, but it is an unusual training. And I think that we have been done a disservice because we do get trained in terms of the couple dynamic, when we could be trained in terms of a more cultural ecosystem dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like friends therapy. We don't think of that very much.
Exactly, right? We're part of a system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you mentioned a stat earlier in the conversation, but, really thinking about loneliness as spiking inside of relationships, which is such an interesting thing to think about. I think we've all experienced that in different ways, but what do you think might be driving that paradox?
Well, there's a heartbreaking moment I witness in sessions, right, where there are two partners sitting 6 inches apart on a couch, and they're both describing feeling utterly alone. And loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of that felt sense of connection. And a recent Gallup poll found that 1 in 4 US men aged 15 to 34 felt lonely often or always, just the day before they were surveyed. So many of those men are in relationships. Why? Because if all your emotional currency sits on one joint account and that account is chronically overdrawn, you start to doubt whether connection is safe at all. So I'm a big fan of Esther Perel. She is, a commonly known psychotherapist, thought partner in the world of psychology, but also pop culture at this point. And she says, we weaken friendship by expecting too little from it and undermine romance by expecting too much of it. So we really need to balance the books, so to speak. This is my old accountant speaking and my old vocation of accountancy. We need to rebalance the books and not put so much on the relationship piece, as I was saying earlier, but also the other accounts that you might have of friends and family.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you too, like what that looks like as a couples therapist, if that's something that you see with the couples that come in to see you, if there is that predominant feeling of loneliness regardless of the physical closeness.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you put it really beautifully. People can be sitting so close to each other and yet they can feel worlds apart. sometimes they can speak to that and sometimes they can't, right? We have to sort of get there
Right.
throughout treatment. But I do think it's a theme of my work, right? These partnerships that either maybe do or don't want to continue in the relationship, but there's this real longing for more of something. And the longing is where there's a ton of curiosity and often a ton of uncertainty, right? What is that thing that you don't have or don't have enough of that feels like it would fill your cup? And so, one thing that I really work to emphasize is not just, what you are or aren't getting in the partnership, but also what are your friendships like, right? Where do you go when you're not with the person that's sitting right next to you right now, right? Where do you get your support? Where do you go for joy? Where do you go when you're feeling sorrow or longing that you don't feel like maybe your partner is the best resource for?
Yes.
So really building out a sort of map and trying to emphasize the full spectrum of relationships from the very beginning of couples work. And I think, sometimes that's a source of tension, right? Sometimes one partner has a really good, friendship ecosystem and then the other doesn't, right? And so that lopsidedness can manifest in all kinds of different ways, but that's all information, right? It's all something to explore and think about. So certainly a theme in my work. And I think the more comfortable you get talking about your wide web of relationships early on in treatment, the more progress and momentum and clarity you're going to feel.
Exactly. Beautifully said.
Yeah. So what do you think about, this sort of like broad idea of friendship? What does that word mean to you? Just so our listeners, can sort of maybe connect with it on a personal level, because I do think it means something slightly different to everyone.
Yes.
It tends to be a catch-all phrase, but we all need different things from friendship. So just, your own experience, if you feel comfortable, what do you look for in friendship?
Well, I think in this particular dynamic that we're talking about, and when we're talking about looking for other relationships to help support one's life, right? It's going beyond the idea of a friend that you go and have a kiki with, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
This is more of a platonic relationship, as the author Raina Cohen would say in her book, The Other Significant Others. So friendship in that context is someone that you can go to and have be your emergency contact, or have those really transparent conversations and say, I'm really not feeling well and I need help, and be okay having that vulnerability. Who knows a lot about you and you're comfortable with them and knowing a lot about you. There is going to be a spectrum of what a friend looks like for everybody, but I think that we don't usually have in our current Western culture a lot of people who have the depth of friendship that I'm talking about. And it's something that I'd love to see fostered more and more.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I love what you said about the spectrum, right? We need different tiers of friendships. Certain relationships are very deep. We go to them for a lot of stuff. They have breadth.
Yes.
And then others are a bit lighter, right? Maybe we would call it quote unquote surface level, but that's not a bad thing, right? I think it's good to have a range.
Absolutely.
And to sort of know, like, listening to your feelings, your body, okay, what is the kind of connection that I need in this particular moment?
Right.
And yeah, again, going back to your question about how it shows up in couples work, I think that can also be part of the lopsidedness, right? If one person has a lot of friends, but they're all maybe slightly more surface level or lighter friendships, and then the other has deeper, more connected, long-standing friendships, those are two very different experiences. So I think a full spectrum is lovely, but also can be really hard to attain and maintain, right?
Yes.
As we grow up and evolve, and sometimes we outgrow friendships.
Absolutely. And, I also think the piece around having a lot of surface level friends, I think there's a piece around having relational language that we don't usually get taught, right? Like how to be in relationship to one another that allows us to go beyond the surface. And that's something that I think therapy is a wonderful vehicle for. It can just break open all types of avenues in terms of understanding yourself, but also understanding others and getting curious about others. And so I myself learned a lot about how to have that vernacular of relationship in therapy. And that just helps, I think, get beyond that person that you go to the museum with and just having that be a museum visit.
Yeah, absolutely. How do we deepen it? When do you want or need to deepen it, right? How do you have the language, the tools to do so?
Yes.
Yeah, again, it's making me think about like friendship therapy. Of course, it comes up in individual work, but we don't really have any frameworks for like someone and their best friend coming into therapy together. I guess maybe it does happen, but it's certainly less common, but maybe we should advocate for that.
No, it definitely does happen. And I think it's beautiful when it does. I think it's
Yeah.
transformational, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about what you think it might look like for friendship to carry more of the support load. And how do you think that might impact the romantic partnership?
So I referenced earlier Raina Cohen's book, The Other Significant Others, earlier, and it was recommended to me by an old colleague when I was working in tech, who's an engineer. And I'm really grateful that he did, because I think it's a really impactful, insightful read. So I highly recommend it. But in it, she profiles Amy and Rebecca, who are platonic friends, who bought a house together. They tagged team chemo appointments. Their marriages didn't fail. They simply breathed easier because support was diversified. And the spouses were able to show up as lovers. So they were not having to be logistical managers and partners to them, which is so important in moments like medical crises, right? So that's one way that you can have this look like in terms of helping carry the burden. Another is pop culture is catching up, right? So in FX, there's a series called Dying for Sex with Michelle Williams, who I love.
So good.
Yes. And in it, Molly Calkin chooses her best friend, Nikki Boyer, to accompany her through her metastatic breast cancer treatments. And she has a wild journey of self-discovery and sexual exploration. And it's a beautiful portrayal of her choosing to go through the process of death with her best friend, right? And what that looks like for the best friend too, because it's not an easy journey, but they're choosing to do it side by side. In that example, the protagonist, her marriage doesn't survive, but you also get to see that her friend supports her through that process, right? But there's a gender pattern here as I'm talking about these different examples. Women are socialized to say, I love you to friends. 41% of women do so weekly, which I think is incredible, while only a quarter of men ever utter those words to buddies. So women often have a head start in this new intimacy economy. We'll circle back to that probably later, to why that gap matters.
Yeah, that's such a striking statistic.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're being somewhat reductive and we're generalizing, so just naming that. But, you know, in your work or your personal experience, what have you witnessed as something that potentially keeps men from leaning on friends in that more intimate, you know, deeper, vulnerable way?
Yeah. So if you're a man listening, as you said, you're probably thinking, one, that's a generalization. So thanks for pointing that out, Lydia. But also, it's awkward to call a friend just to chat. And the awkwardness isn't personal, it's cultural. For generations, tenderness has been coded as unmanly unless it's channeled into romantic love or violence on playing a field, right? So those are the two dynamics that have been provided to men. I was really struck recently by a TikTok experiment that has gone viral. I'm not on TikTok, so I actually saw this on Instagram, and that really shows my age that I'm on Instagram.
It's important.
But men phoned a male friend of theirs simply to say, hey, like, just calling to say goodnight, sleep well. And millions watched this because it felt alien. And because it felt alien, it was almost radical, right? And the response to these men calling their friends on the other end, their friends were kind of like, are you okay? Is something wrong?
Is this a crisis?
Is this a crisis? Like, what is going on? So meanwhile, like, data is telling us that 15% of US men report zero close friends today. So that's a fivefold jump since 1990. And relationships are scaffolding and half the beams are missing, right? Couples wobble when men lack that external support. So this is a really big piece of the puzzle that's missing.
Yeah, it's also making me think about experience and having that kind of relationship as part of your emotional landscape as you grow up. And I think, yes, we're being reductive again, but there's a sort of comfortability with some of that language and some of that open expression. I love you. I miss you. How are you? Things are not good. I need you, right? It feels like that's a little more integrated sometimes for women as we get older. And yeah, it's making me think that sometimes when people end up, I'm thinking, specifically of a straight relationship, people end up in partnership and one person has a lot of experience in that way and then the other person doesn't, that can feel jarring, right? And it's not that that can't be worked through, but yeah, I think it's a really important thing in general, but also to think about, what we witness and what we are exposed to at a very young age, right? What do our family systems, what are our friend structures sort of encourage us to do or say? And then how do those muscles strengthen over time? And it's applicable in any type of relationship, right? But thinking, specifically of some like gender stereotypes, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, and they are stereotypes, but usually stereotypes are there for a particular reason, right? Because there is a large quantity of people that we're seeing with the same trend. But we can also see this with, as you said, cultures. I'm married to a German. Yes, he's man, but many Germans don't express their love as profusely as I'm used to, right? And so that's like a different shift if you're going to be in a multicultural relationship. So there's lots of different things that you have to overcome in both a romantic relationship but also a platonic relationship.
Yeah.
Hi, Lovelink listeners. Our group practice, Modern Mind, is located in New York City with offices in Brooklyn and Manhattan, offering in-person and virtual psychotherapy. We provide individual, couples, and group therapy, as well as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in conjunction with a psychiatry prescriber. Therapy is a powerful experience that can transform your life and help you live it to its full potential. We're here to help take you where you want to go. To find out more about our practice, visit www.modernmind.co or email info@modernmind.co to be connected with one of our therapists.
So we've all heard that fire needs air. How does spending time apart with friends benefit a couple's desire?
Yeah, so think back to science class. Fire needs oxygen and desire works the same way. And this also goes again back to Esther Perel. So in one longitudinal study, couples who scheduled one evening per week in separate social spaces, whether they're book clubs or pickup basketball, game night, reported 15% higher sexual satisfaction after 6 months. Why? You're going to collect new stories. You see yourself through fresh eyes and you're coming home with just a little bit of mystery. You're returning not as exhausted coworkers in the business of life, but as two lively humans magnetized by curiosity. You're coming back with a sense of otherness, right? And that's bringing in that oxygen that's required for fire.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is this something that you encourage in your couples work? Or is this a sort of like tool or quote unquote homework assignment that you might give a couple you're working with?
Absolutely. And it can be really challenging because, as you pointed out earlier, there are oftentimes a disparity between couples who have one person with a very extensive social map and then one that is a little bit less so. And so their feelings are like, well, if one person's going out constantly and the other one doesn't feel like they have the ability to. And so this is an experiment, right? And I encourage people to think of it as an experiment. You can time box it. Do this for a month, do it for 2 months. And for the person who doesn't have as an extensive map, make this as a trial to meet people. There are so many, we live in New York, but every city or town has opportunities for meeting people. For one example, here in New York, there's Floating Mountain, which is one of my favorite tea shops, but they also have these great evenings where you get to learn chess or tarot or anything that's really interesting that piques your interest, right? And that's a great example for you to get to meet someone who might have a similar interest.
Yeah, I'm thinking about overlap, right? Sometimes friend groups are very separate from our romantic partner or partners. And then other times there's a lot of congruency,
Yes.
right? There's a lot of overlap. And I'm curious what you think about that piece in relation to this idea of really investing in friendships separate from a romantic partnership. Do you feel like it's important to maintain some separateness there?
I do. I think it's really important. It's a way to help maintain a sense of self too, right? Like it's great to have a common group of friends and also have a group of friends that are your own. And it again helps diversify the burden of what is on the romantic relationship, as well as the group of friends, right? So you're not just putting everything on this one group of friends, but also you're bringing in different experiences when you come back together.
Yeah, one thing that is a sort of theme in therapy is often, clients will raise concern over their friend's perception of their romantic partner. So again, this is like this is a slight sidestep, but, I think it's an important dynamic to highlight here, bring into the conversation, because it does create tension in both directions, right? Maybe your partner or partners doesn't really have a good relationship with your friends, or your friends don't really, hold your partner or partners in high regard. And so it can create a lot of friction. And, we're therapists, we're there to listen and guide and support, but we don't always have the solution to those dynamics. So I don't know. I'm just curious what you think about that when friendship is actually a source of friction in the relationship.
When there's friction, I get curious, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's always, a reason for that friction. If it's about personality stuff, that's, something that can be overcome. If it's about something that brings up in the other person, that's a really great data point to talk about. But all of it is something that is worthwhile for conversation. It's not something you can't overcome.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So life throws curveballs, right? New baby, new job, loss, illness, grief, all of the above. How does a wider friendship circle stop couples from buckling under stress?
Well, marriage is by definition temporary. I always hate saying that because we go into it hoping it's not going to be that, right? But it's going to end in either a separation, divorce, or in death. It sounds super morbid, but acknowledging the impermanence is very liberating because it reminds us that we have to weave that wider net of people. So it's more than just those two people. One trend that I love that I recently read is that friends are now co-purchasing roughly 1 in 7 U.S. homes. So they're splitting their mortgages, they're sharing repairs, they're insulating each other from financial shocks. And when the unexpected arrives, like a layoff, the new baby, an illness, the couple inside that ecosystem isn't carrying the whole weight alone. So when the marriage does have its natural end, there is that support net for them. And the village is keeping the roof on, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this idea. I've heard a bunch of people emphasizing this lately, but when you go through a breakup or a divorce or a separation, sometimes it feels like you've lost yourself, right? This thing that was making you feel whole or complete or sturdy is now no longer a piece of it. Or a piece of you and your story. And that's true on some level, but really remembering and honoring that you're still you, right? You are still a full person. And it's not that, relationship didn't matter. There weren't lessons learned or things that you'll carry forward. But yeah, you're still whole, right? Even when it doesn't feel like that in the throes of grief. But I think that's really beautiful. And in the context of marriage, that's essentially what you're saying, right? Whether it ends because, one or both people die or because you decide to walk away, right? There's always going to be an ending. And, how do we prep for that, right? How do we sort of accommodate those things, those other things that we're going to need when that person isn't part of the story anymore? So sure, it's slightly morbid, but it's really important. Yeah.
It's morbid if you let it be, but it can be really, as I said, liberating. And if you also let it be that, right? And if you approach it from that perspective, and then you think about it from kind of this holistic life planning way, then putting all those other pieces in place, like Indra's net, makes everything else kind of fall into place. Like, yes, of course, I need to have a larger relational ecosystem. This all makes sense because I can't do it alone, and I can't put this all on another person.
Yeah. So what do you think about this idea? We're de-emphasizing the romantic partnership or romantic partnerships as like the burning fire that's the center of everything. But I want to also call to our attention, depending on your demeanor, your lived experience, sometimes people have a really hard time letting their guard down and actually, stepping into the partnership in a way that allows for deep connection, security, contentment, right? And again, that it's really personal, contextual, but I guess maybe how do you strike a balance between these two ideas, right? Of not putting all of the emphasis on a romantic partnership, but also not, letting it be some kind of block where you can't go into that deep connection. Does that make sense? I'm talking about extreme versions, but I think it's,
Well, hopefully I might not be understanding your question, but you can clarify for me. But hopefully the end result is that the romantic relationship actually burns brighter, and that there is a lot of playfulness and interest in one another, and that there's more chemistry and compelling draw to the relationship.
Yeah.
Because there is a sense of mystery, because there is a lack of utter dependence on one another. And so when you have kind of that diversification of support, you're also able to kind of let your guard down also too, because you're not having the defenses of, I need this to be perfect. I need everything to be correct because this is all I've got. And you're holding on so tightly that you're smothering it, right? Like you're able to give that oxygen, to let your hand open a little bit and let things unfold as they do organically.
Yeah. I think the perfectionism or the sort of like fantasies that we create around our romantic relationships, like that's beautifully said. I think that's exactly my question, right? How do we sort of mind that gap so that the relationship can deepen, right? We can step into it in a way that allows for vulnerability and security, right? All the things that we long for, without it feeling like if we don't get it here, we won't get it anywhere else. So, it's an experiment, and it's push and pull, right? I think it's exciting to be in our seat, right? Because we get to be part of that dance, part of that conversation. But I think that makes a lot of sense.
We do get to be part of the conversation, and we are part of someone's map, right, of important relationships.
Yeah.
We're one of those small pillars. And that's a real privilege to be able to help support someone in that way so that it isn't just fully on another person.
Yeah. So, Chloé, you've convinced me. friendship is certainly, incredibly meaningful and important. And I'm wondering if you can give our listeners some practical moves to expand their intimacy portfolio.
Yes. So the first one I would recommend is doing an audit of your intimacy portfolio, as you called it. So it's as simple as opening your calendar or your phone's call log and seeing who gets your prime real estate and who's camping on the margins. Many clients discover 80% of their relational energy goes to one or two people. And part of that audit is also seeing who are you not giving energy to that you would actually like to give more energy to, right? And who are you not getting energy back from that you're giving a lot of energy to? So this is a really great exercise to do. Another is what I like to call scheduling a friend Sabbath. So this is blocking a recurring time for friendship. It could be a brunch every second Saturday. It could be trivia night, whatever feels really sacred to you, but protect it in a way you would a date night or something that we would normally prioritize for a romantic partnership. Another could be celebrating platonic anniversaries. Happy 8-year friendship friend. Go for a toast. Ritualize those relationships with intention. It's very important to make them as important as any other relationship in your life. Another one would be creating a care spreadsheet. So this would be a shared doc. I really love spreadsheets. I apologize. That would list who needs support in your group of friends, who can provide meals, rides, childcare, and it can take a lot of pressure off of the romantic dyad during crises. Or even just like the week, right? And this really comes into play when you have an integrated community of really close friends, let's say a group of 4 or 5 couples that are spending a lot of time together. You can have transparent boundary chats, so talk openly with your partner and friends about time, jealousy, expectations. Clarity prevents hurt feelings. Brene Brown, thank you for, coining the clarity is kindness for all of us. And then the last that I would say is try the 2 text challenge. Once a week, text 2 friends you haven't spoken to in a month. The algorithm is super simple, but the impact is profound.
Beautiful. Yeah, these are wonderful ideas. And I think, give people things to experiment with, right? See what lands, see what resonates. One thing that's coming up is just, again, I see a lot in individual and couples work, this real friction around time management, right? We want to do all of these things. I want to be able to dedicate more time to my friendships, to my family, whatever it may be. And it just feels like the calendar is so jam-packed. So I think, again, this resource list really speaks to that. There's all kinds of ways that you can integrate this. Texting, calling, meeting in person, right? Give yourself a lot of grace. It's not easy to maintain relationships, right? And what we're saying is make sure you do maintain the full spectrum of relationships in your life. So yeah, just wanted to name that piece too, right? It's important to sort of know your limitations, know what you need more or less of, and take care of yourself as you're experimenting with it.
Of course. We're all human, so good enough is good enough in my books. I would also like to say before we wrap that connection is deeply important, even if we're looking at the polybagel theory point of view. It gets us out of the fight, flight, fear, reptilian brain response of things. Connection is what keeps us in our parasympathetic system, keeps us really feeling secure and in ourself with a capital S. So the more that we can stay connected to one another, especially in our world that feels more and more chaotic and really scary sometimes, the more we're going to feel really secure. And so this is going beyond just the romantic dyad. This is going into how can we live fully and healthfully in a world that feels sometimes out of control and sideways.
Yeah, and emphasizing that it's reciprocal, right? We show up for other people. We have these conversations. We meet up, we text, we call, right? We're giving parts of ourselves in all of those interactions, but we're also, if it's a good, healthy, functioning relationship, we're also getting something in return. So, Again, I know sometimes when we feel maxed out or maybe things are stressful at work or at home, sometimes it feels like friendships can feel like something on the to-do list. And, I think what we're doing in this conversation is really emphasizing that it's a high reward system, right? And if you put the intentionality behind it, good things will come from it in every element of your life, right? Not just in that particular relationship, but in everything that you touch and do. And I think it's wonderful. So before we wrap, what question can listeners ask themselves to start auditing their own intimacy ecosystem?
Super simple. You can ask yourself, who else can witness me and whom will I choose to witness? Friendship isn't a luxury add-on, as you were saying earlier, Lydia. It's the rhythm section that lets romance dance or have its riffs. So water just one friendship this week and notice how much lighter, more playful, even sexier your partnership starts to feel.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chloe. It was so much fun to have this conversation with you. Listeners, please tag Lovelink with your plans for who can witness you and who you choose to witness this week, or share privately with someone who needs permission to widen their circle. Stay curious, stay connected, and remember, lovers thrive when the village keeps the beat.